Have you seen how many Final Fantasy games there are? I mean, just look at this list. In total, there are 94 games.
94 games.
15 mainline games, not counting 10 sequels and 13 2 sequels, plus taking into account the different re-releases of each game. You could probably imagine all of this can look pretty overwhelming, and people wanting to test the waters of this series always want to know which one to start off with. Well, today I'm going to try to guide you through which games are great for you to start off with. Of course, as always, this is just my opinion, so my recommendations might differ from what other fans might tell you. First, don't let the number of the games overwhelm you. Each game, aside from the direct sequels such as 10-2, are not connected. So each game is its own independent title with their own universe and characters. So don't worry about the issue of playing earlier games because each game does not affect the other. There are exceptions, however, like I said before, and I want to clarify these so this makes sense. Both Final Fantasy X and 13 have direct sequels, and you can tell by the numbers at the end that they are different from the Roman numerals. For example, 10-2 is a direct sequel to 10, and the story won't make any sense unless you play 10, as the characters are the same and the story is a continuation. Same goes for 13-2 and Lightning Returns, which are sequels to 13 directly and should be played after you decide to play 13, but more on that later. I'll be going over a few games and giving my reasons as to why you should start at these titles by explaining some of their strengths, weaknesses, overall presentation, and which platforms that you can play them on. My first pick, which I always say is the best place to start, is Final Fantasy VII. Everyone has at least seen parts of this game due to how popular it is, so you might feel more comfortable with this game first. It's got hallmarks such as Cloud, Sephiroth, Midgar, Meteor, Aerith, iconic music, and I'm sure you've recognized all of these at least once from somewhere else. Its gameplay is honestly timeless, and it uses a system called the Materia system, which is a magic system that streamlines magic and allows everyone to use the same spells and abilities. Being simple and easy to learn, the system is good for new players to get familiar with the party management and experimenting with different options. If you pay attention, the story is also easy to follow and is a very exciting ride from start to finish. And I attribute that to how easy it is to pick up and play. Now, this game can be played on a lot of systems, which means it's available on Xbox One and Game Pass for free, PlayStation, PC, and Nintendo Switch. The Xbox, PlayStation, and Switch versions have improved visuals and frame rate along with tools that allow for easier play such as 3x speed, increased stats, and an option to turn off random encounters. Keep in mind that if you played the PC version on Steam, you might want to consider modding the game to get a better experience, as the PC ports for Final Fantasy games have notoriously been not too great, so I'd recommend either that or playing on these consoles. Another great game in the series that is really easy to pick up and play is Final Fantasy IX. This game is basically a mixture of all the games that came before and does a little bit of everything. Just like 7, the game has a very memorable cast of characters, a great story, and gameplay. Combat is very standard turn-based combat, but instead of the universal magic system, it goes back to character-specific abilities that are unique to each character. However, each character can unlock new abilities through leveling up their gear, which can provide new abilities to use or flat percentage buffs. It's very easy to understand and manage, just like the Materia system. The story might vary for others, as the opening may seem slow to some people, or it might just be right. But no matter what the plot does, it picks up early on and only gets better from there. This game is among the easier in the series as well, as many of the same quality of life features from the 7 re-release include fast forward speed, increased stats, unlimited gil, no random encounters, and some more options. Final Fantasy IX can be played on Xbox One with Game Pass as well, PlayStation, Nintendo Switch, PC, and iOS or Android. Each console port plays really well with improved visuals and frame rate like usual. I'm not too familiar with the PC version, but I believe it has some issues with audio quality, but I'm not too sure, so don't fact check me on that. So you might have to look into that if you want to play on PC. Final Fantasy X is my next pick, mainly for its accessibility and simple gameplay. 10 was when the series became more streamlined and somewhat simplified, and it's actually one of its strengths, Exploration is based on running in straight lines with some minor puzzles in some sections, rather than open world design like previous games. You'll either like this a lot or you'll dislike this depending on your preference, but it does make it less overwhelming if you're not sure about getting into a traditional game in the series just yet. Combat also is purely turn-based instead of using an ATB system, so you'll have as much time as you need to make decisions in battle and plan each turn, similar to Final Fantasy 1 and 2. Whether you like the characters and the story will depend on you. The characters are generally likable and the story is decent, but things like the story are going to be very subjective, so keep that in mind. Final Fantasy X can be played on Xbox One, but not with Game Pass, PlayStation, Nintendo Switch, PC, and iOS or Android. This version of the game is the HD remaster, which comes bundled with the sequel 10-2, so if you like 10, consider playing that as well right after. These next few games I'm going to try and quickly go over to make sure the video isn't too long. Final Fantasy VI is another easy game to pick up and play, and it's my favorite in the series personally. With an amazing story, likable characters, music, and gameplay design, the game is very good for beginners as well. The only reason why I don't have this game higher here is because of its availability. Because if you want to play the original SNES version of the game, you'll have to either play it on the original system, played on an SNES Classic, or the GBA version. Want to make a correction after editing, you can also play Final Fantasy VI, the SNES version, on the PlayStation 1 if you have the PlayStation 1 Final Fantasy Anthology. But since all these options aren't going to be readily available and can be pretty expensive, you might have to play the Steam and iOS versions if you're not going to be doing these or emulation, which I have to admit, Steam and iOS versions are not very good in my opinion. The art style, at least in my opinion, is very ugly and not good on the eyes. If you don't care about this art style and you don't care about the mobile game format and UI, then Final Fantasy VI is definitely worth it. My final pick would be Final Fantasy IV, which, just like every game on this list, is pretty easy in difficulty and is quick to get into. When it comes to customizability, warning, there isn't much here, as each character is basically their own job that can't be customized beyond the weapons or armor you choose. So because of this, the game is mainly story driven, so if you don't mind more simple gameplay and just going along with the narrative, then this game is perfect for you. The story is pretty good, and the cast is very memorable and likable, so you don't have to worry about a poor story, but of course this is subjective. If you want to play the original SNES version of the game, you'll either need the original SNES, or you could also play the PlayStation 1 release if you have the PlayStation 1. The best version is the PSP remaster. If you can get your hands on a PSP or use an emulator on PC, this is the best version of the game by far to play. There are also the 3D remakes on the DS and Steam, although this isn't my preference, but if you'd like, these versions are also pretty good. They have voice acting and they have 3D graphics if that's your thing. But keep in mind, these releases are a bit harder in difficulty than the original game. If you've played some of these games that I just went over, then you can start venturing out into the rest of the series. After these games, Final Fantasy 1 and 2 are good places to go. Then I would say maybe 5, then 8, 12, and then 13. Now that you have some recommendations on where to start, you can start your Final Fantasy playthrough. I really hope this guide was useful, and you don't have to follow my recommendations. There are several content creators on YouTube who have made videos just like this, so take in multiple views if you still aren't sure where to start. With that being said, I wish you luck in picking a game, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.